Welcome once again to our program, Polygamy, What Love Is This? We welcome you tonight. We are a program that is dedicated to the subject of polygamy, where we tell it like it is when you call in and ask your questions and voice your concerns about early Mormon polygamy or contemporary polygamy and polygamy groups. I'd like to take a moment tonight to just wish America a happy birthday. This is the 4th of July weekend, and we know that there are a lot of people celebrating the 4th of July this weekend. We hope you have a safe weekend and also a very delightful one. We are blessed to live in America, where we do have so many freedoms in the land of the free. And you know, the responsibilities that come with freedom, sometimes we have shirked, and that means that our freedoms are eroded. And I would just like to state that we need to get our responsibilities back in order. I ask God that He would bless the troops around the world who are actually working right now to protect our freedoms, and that He would continue to bless America. Actually, this program is about freedoms. The freedoms that we enjoy as birthrights, being born in America, are often deprived by people and to people in polygamy groups, especially the female members of polygamy groups. Basic freedoms we take for granted, like when she can marry, or who she should marry, or even if she should marry. Oftentimes the basic freedom of when you can go to school, or if you can get a job at a certain place. These are deprived by certain members in certain polygamy groups. Often women are even expected to produce a baby a year. You know, the free agency that these groups preach and practice actually are not evident in the working out of these polygamy groups. They think that they are exercising their free agency, but in reality they're not. They're actually in a bondage to a false salvation, and they don't need to live polygamy to please God. I'm Doris Hanson, and I was born and raised in a polygamy group, and this group, like the rest of them, practiced and taught a doctrine of a false salvation. The salvation that they taught was a result of living polygamy, and the salvation they say is available only if you're in that polygamy group or that group. Actually, all of the religions that have stemmed from Joseph Smith will say the same thing, that you need to be in this group. It's the only true church on the planet. You know, that isn't true. If you hear that, if someone's told you that, don't walk, run from them, because that isn't God's salvation plan. You know, when I was a teenager, my father told me that he was going to see to it that I got to heaven if he had to kick me all the way there. And at the time, I remember thinking, I don't think I want to be there if that's the way it works. And I wondered why God would have a heaven filled with people that had to be forced to go there. I didn't realize at the time that that wasn't God's salvation plan, and I did find out much later that God does have a way to heaven. It's one way, it's His way, it's pre-planned, and it's not through the polygamy group. And I'm sorry folks, it's not through any exclusive religious group here. It's through Jesus Christ. He is the way. Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. Jesus didn't die on the cross for our resurrection. You know, everyone's going to be resurrected. The Bible says some to eternal life and some to everlasting contempt. Jesus didn't die on the cross for our resurrection. He died for our sins, because the wages of sin is death, and Jesus took that death. Jesus didn't bleed in the garden for our salvation. He died on the cross for our sins. He is the only way to heaven. You don't have to live polygamy to get there. That's good news. That's what the gospel is. I want to remind you this is a live telephone call-in program, and our telephone number you might want to jot down. Later on we'll be opening up the telephone for phone calls, is 801-973-TV20. That's 973-8820. I'd also like to announce that our webpage, aboutpolygamy.com, now has streaming video of previous programs on it, and each subsequent program will be put on the web page. So if you've missed a program, or if you know people in areas where they can't get the show, you might tell them that they can go to aboutpolygamy.com and click on the links. They can get more information about polygamy, and they can also watch the streaming videos of the previous shows. I also would like to invite you to email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. If you have private questions, confidential remarks, or something like that, just let us know, and everything will be held in the strictest of confidence. Or if you have suggestions for future programming, some topic that you would like to have covered, just send us an email, and we would be happy to look it over. From now on, from this program on, we're going to incorporate into the show some interesting news items or tidbits, or maybe even some previous quotes that have been made in the past regarding contemporary, or again, the early Mormon polygamy from the past and to the present day. Tonight, I have chosen a quote that was made by George A. Smith. George A. Smith was a cousin to Joseph Smith. He was a member of the Quorum of the 12. He was a member of the First Presidency, and George A. Smith had 6 wives. As I read this quote, there are 2 pronouns, we and they. The we pronoun is referring to the Mormons, and the they pronoun is referring to the non-Mormons. And this is the quote as reported in the Deseret News in April of 1856. George A. Smith stated, "We breathe the free air, we have the best-looking men and the handsomest women, and if they envy us our position, well they may, for they are a poor, narrow-minded, pinch-back race of men who chain themselves down to the law of monogamy and live all their days under the dominion of one wife. They ought to be ashamed of such conduct and the still fouler channel which flows from their practices." You know, George A. Smith is calling non-Mormons some pretty awful names there. He's calling them poor, narrow-minded, pinch-backed, chained to monogamy. You know, he's making a mockery of monogamy, which is something that God Himself instituted. That isn't a good idea. We are often accused by polygamists and by Mormons of being contentious. However, we can find dozens and dozens of quotes like this where we are called names. This man has called us some pretty bad names here, and we're called contentious. You know, we use the Bible against the doctrines of the polygamy groups who claim that polygamy is a requirement from God. The Bible is our plumb line. And we use that, and we'll continue to use it, because they use the Bible to say that it is God's will, and it is not. We're not being contentious, we're being truthful, and that's what God wants us to be. The Bible does say that we are to contend for the faith once for all given to the saints. That's once, no restoration was needed, for all time, for all people, given to the saints. We don't need anything else. It's already here, and polygamy is not part of it. Those of you who have seen the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, will recognize the closing comments on that documentary that was made by Mary Mackert. She said that she had lifted up one of her sons and twirled him around, saying, "Hallelujah, I have a son who doesn't know who Joseph Smith is." Tonight, our special guest is Ben Draper, the son who did not know who Joseph Smith was. Ben, welcome to our program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We interviewed your mother 2 weeks in a row, last week and the week before. And of course, she was a delight. She always is, and I'm sure you know that already, that she is.
Yes, thank you.
Mary is almost a celebrity, you know. She travels a lot. She's a guest speaker in many places. She's an author. What is it like to be a son of a celebrity?
Well, to me, she's just mom, so and that's how it'll always be. But it's great to have a mother that's such a wonderful example, even before all of the events that have taken place and all the speaking arrangements and her book and everything like that. My mom's just been a wonderful example, and she's been a delight to be around. I'm glad and lucky to have her as a mother.
Yes, you are, and she is a very down-to-earth woman. She's a very dear friend. I appreciate her a lot. You are the son that she was referring to as not knowing who Joseph Smith is. She told me that there's a story that is surrounding that, and that you know the story and that you'd love to tell it in the interview. Would you mind explaining that to us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Growing up, when I was a child, in school, in public school in Utah, a majority of the children there were LDS, and I would just hear them making reference to Joseph Smith this or that, and I never really thought much of it, and I just kind of went about my business. And finally one day it just got to me, and I came home and I said, Mom, I just don't understand, how did they find out what his last name was? And she says, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I know Joseph and Mary, but I never read any reference to his last name, and why did they just throw a Smith on there? And she just grinned in delight. She thought that was wonderful that I didn't know who Joseph Smith was. So finally, when I put two and two together and realized that they were talking about two different people, as a young child, I just figured, you're talking about Joseph, it had to have been Joseph and Mary, that Joseph. So.
Yeah, and that makes sense if you don't know who Joseph Smith is.
Definitely.
And of course, not being part of your raising you up and growing you up in that religious belief.
Yeah, correct.
A lot of people don't know who Joseph Smith is. How old were you when your mother left the polygamy group?
When my mother left, I was about 2 or 3 years old, a very young age, and I didn't have much experience or knowledge in the group. Being such a young age when she left, I wasn't, the imprint of polygamy hadn't been placed quite yet. So,
do you have any memories of that time? Any trauma that was going on?
No traumas really. Every once in a while I might remember getting dropped on my head, but like most kids. But no, for the most part, I just remember having lots of brothers and sisters to play with, and it was a good time. I always had a playmate and someone to be my friend. So,
so it's good memories that you had then.
Great.
Yeah. You were the youngest of 5 boys, and so when your mother left the polygamy group, like you say, your memory didn't include any of the trauma that went on with your brothers. There were issues that they had that we have learned about from Mary that they had to deal with and you didn't. Now, from your viewpoint, can you explain some of those issues as you saw it, how it affected your brothers? And that would be issues at home or with friends, like in the neighborhood, or at school with relationships there.
Yeah, well, I think that the hardest, I guess, leaving and the transition there was probably the hardest on my eldest brother, from my viewpoint. When we left, like I said, I was about 2 or 3, so that would have made him 12 or 13. I just imagine growing up your entire life and you've been told that the way you're living and everything that you're doing is fact, and that it's the truth and it's the right. And one day, the mother that had been raising you to do all these things said, you know what, this is a lie, this is no longer truth. So the foundation that all of my brothers have been raised on had been significantly impacted.
Yes.
And so having that pulled out from underneath you is a very, I guess, a big experience, a big trauma. And to be in that fragile age, at 12, 13, and even, 6, 7, and 8, anything like that, you're going to have a significant impact on your psyche or your self-image, or, there's going to be a lot of doubts that creep in. And my oldest brother, he actually was to the point where his opinion had been formed. He believed that it was right, and you know what, that this wasn't going to be him. So even though my mom was awarded custody a short time later after she left, he stayed and he kept running away, and finally my mom just said, if that's the way that he wants to live, I can respect that, and she let him stay. The rest of my brothers, they had a hard time transitioning from the polygamist groups into public school. Imagine, we were not, it's not like we were well off or had money to buy clothes and fit in, and so we left with what we had. And so you had kids that were obviously different, dressed just like polygamists, integrated into a public school system.
Now, at that time, did they have the long sleeves?
Oh,
and all
definitely.
That, like
yeah, jeans and long sleeves, and you never caught us in short sleeve shirts or anything like that. We just didn't have the money to purchase anything that would make us even, remotely look like we fit in.
So you stood out like
definitely.
in school then.
Definitely. My brothers had a horrible time transitioning into a public school system where, again, imagine their whole lives they've been raised that this world outside of our community hated them.
Yes.
And despised them, and was wicked and evil. And now all of a sudden you're supposed to be associating with these kids,
rubbing
and
shoulders with them every day.
exactly. And so not only did they feel that they had to keep themselves at a distance still, but everyone else kind of looked at them as at a distance. They didn't look like they fit in. They didn't act like they fit in. And so it was very hard for them.
Oh, it would be. That is very difficult. Did you find that it was difficult to deal with the fact that polygamy was part of your family identity, even though you weren't in that as much as your brothers were? It still was part of your family identity. Did that brush off onto you at all?
I really embraced, I would say, my heritage, or that part of my family history. At a young age, I remember just growing up, and no one really knew, and it was never a secret. I would talk to people about it, and every once in a while I would mention, yeah, well, my dad had 7 wives, and they would kind of laugh and think I was joking. And I would sit there and stare them in the face, and then they'd realize I wasn't, that I was serious, and they felt embarrassed that they had that kind of reaction. But no, everyone saw, for the most part, even children and friends my own age saw that I was normal, and it wasn't really anything to be weirded out about, or they didn't. So it was I adapted well, and I think it was embraced by my family and my friends and the new circle that I created once we left.
And polygamists are human too. We don't agree with their doctrinal position, but they certainly are human, and there's nothing less than human about them. So I'm glad that you had a good transition with it. How deeply affected was your relationship with your brothers because of their polygamy group experiences? And we'll get into some of the trauma that they suffered a little bit later. But right now, how were you affected with your relationship with your brothers because of what they went through?
I had a wonderful relationship with all of my brothers. We were very close growing up. I would say the biggest difference between my brothers and I is how we viewed our upbringing and our childhood. I mean, obviously going through what they went through, they had a very rough childhood, and having a mother that's been telling you one way is right your whole life, and then switching, and your view of that authority figure is definitely going to be skewed and in question. And me growing up, I thought I had the greatest mother ever, and so I didn't have to ever question. It was always a steady and stable environment for me, and because of the integration and the change there, I mean, there was a lot of questions brought into them about their authority figure and their mother, and the views and decisions that she made. So that kind of brought maybe some segregation between my brothers and I about how we felt about it. But all of us now, I think we're all on the same page, and we have a great relationship.
So when you say the authority figure, were your brothers looking maybe askance at your mother as being an authority figure because she was a female, because they'd been raised that the male has the authority, or is it for some other reason that they had questioned her authority figure?
Well, in polygamy, I guess you would say that it is customary that there's males, and the male, the male is the authority figure. But in our specific home, we didn't really see my dad a whole lot, and so even though our father was the ultimate authority in our home, really everything kind of ran through mom first. And so everyone knew, if you got in trouble, you got taken to mother, and if it was a big enough kind of trouble, then you got taken to dad. So
eventually,
exactly. So everything went through mom first, and so we always viewed her as our authority, or our respected her as our mother. And so but I think the biggest question that is she was the one saying, hey, you need to live this way, and follow, and live this life and the way that we were raised in polygamy, and then all of a sudden it changed. And obviously the way she felt and acted and believed, and she changed, and to see that change in her kind of made us question her too. So we see a big change in her, and this is the woman we've been following our whole lives, and so I think that's where a lot of that came from.
Your brothers did go through some recovery issues. Do you recall that that's what they were going through? Were you too young to understand that? And if you did understand that, did that kind of draw you closer to them as they were going through the recovery?
You know, yeah, there was a really hard time for me. I remember as a young child, I was very close with my brothers, and you know, there was a time there that I guess you could say we felt like it was just us, and so we were very close and we clung to each other, and so, you know, the bond, I guess, between brothers was really, really great, and you know, the things that they had suffered and gone through kind of just brought us closer together.
Good.
And you know, I don't know if I was really aware of everything that was going on and what they were going through at such a young age, but just enough to know that, you know, they needed someone, even if it was just a little brother to pick on or just to be around, you know. But I felt that
And
that need.
sometimes the unconditional love is a little sibling can just be a blessing too to the older children as they are going through some of these trials.
Oh yeah, I looked up to my brothers tremendously, and so they always had a little guy following them around.
Yeah. Let's talk about your dad a little bit, with your relationship with him. First of all, I'd like you to explain your relationship with him and your brother's relationship with him as you saw it.
Well, first of all, the relationship I had with my father was almost non-existent. In the 2 or 3 years that we lived with my father, or, you know, I guess that we were in a home that you know, in the same house with my dad, the only times we really got to spend with my dad were when we were in serious, serious trouble, or when we saw him at the dinner table and he was praying. You know, so for the most part, it felt like we had grown up without a father. That was my point of view, and my relationship with my father was non-existent, and he was pretty much just a stranger in my own home. I guess from what I saw as my brother's view, it would be the similar viewpoint. They felt the same way. They were getting in bigger kinds of trouble because they were older and more frequently, so that they could get to hang out with dad. You know, the only time you get to see your dad is when you're in big trouble. So
that would be a negative relationship at that point.
Definitely. You know, I mean, you're acting out, and really the only time you got attention from your father was when you were acting out. And so there was a lot of people acting out just to get face time with dad.
How would that affect their relating to other male figures as an authority figure? If their dad, they're the only being their authority figure, and yet in a negative sense, did it affect them at all, or even you with your lack of being fathered? You
know, I know that for me it was growing up, and even at a young age, I started noticing that I had authority issues and almost a complex with male authority figures. My male teachers, and then you know, anyone, my youth leaders, and I started noticing that I would butt heads with them it almost felt like on purpose. And so I kind of identified that, and I started backing off. But I got along with female authority figures, my teachers, and anyone in a female sense very well at a young age. But I noticed that probably as a product of my upbringing, that I had a hard time with
that makes sense.
Male authority. So
yeah, that makes sense. And you had a good relationship with your mother, so you had no difficulty with female relationships, and the same with your father. That makes a lot of sense. Did you feel at all, well, of course you didn't spend a whole lot of time with your dad, but any time that you did you feel like that you were fulfilled in the time that you spent with him, or were you yearning for more? Did you yearn for the father?
Oh, desperately yearning for more. You know, growing up, I remember even, you know, after we had left and we were gone, being very envious and jealous of my friends that had fathers, and looking at them, and you know, if I saw someone that I felt like was less deserving, I didn't understand why he got to have a dad and that I didn't. You know, and when I got older, you know, and you know, dads weren't around and stuff like that, I started not to mind as much, you know, because I got away with more. But no, definitely I was a little jealous, and I coveted having that father figure in my life.
And you know, that's only natural. I found that in my own experience. My dad only had 2 wives, and the first family had the official family privileges of calling him dad and living with him and having his name, and we didn't. We had to call him by his first name. We had to have a fake last name and all of that. So I found that it was very sad for me not to be able to have a father to relate to like that too. It's a sad situation. Well, you didn't, excuse me, you didn't belong to the FLDS anymore, and you didn't belong to the Mormon Church, and those two groups make up most of the population of the state of Utah. At least it certainly did at that time, 25 years ago. As a result of that, would you explain your feelings or your sense of belonging or not belonging?
You know, at a young age, you could notice the difference between, you know, whether you were welcomed or not. You know, I always felt welcomed by friends and things like that, but after a while, there were certain kids that I wasn't allowed to play with, or, you know, they weren't allowed to play with me. You know, there was things going on like that at a young age, but for the most part, I found a great group of friends, and it's amazing because years and years after high school, I'm still friends with all of them. I've known them through junior high and high school, so I found a great support system in my friends, and we stuck together. So, you know, we all came from different backgrounds, different you know, religious beliefs, and you know, we just agreed that that we liked each other, and we were all tolerant of what the other one believed. So
you didn't let any religious beliefs get in your way of your friendships?
Definitely not.
That's good. That's healthy. And so, kind of on the same line, how did your school friends or your neighborhood buddies view your previous life in polygamy? Did they all know that you had a previous life in polygamy?
Oh, definitely. You know,
you didn't have to hide it from anybody?
No, not at all. Not at all. When we, you know, as we became friends and it came up, you know, or maybe even if they might have been a perfect stranger and they were just around and they heard the story or heard someone, you know, because I poked fun at it a lot or always joked and said, yeah, I'm going to grow up and be like my dad, you know, and I'd you know, wave over a couple different girls, you know, and always joke. So, you know, I had an open sense of humor, and I was very open to it, and so I think everyone kind of mirrored my my outtake on my upbringing, and so they were okay with it, and I was okay with it. If I would have had a problem or maybe been ashamed or didn't bring it up, I think that other people and my friends would have shared that same the same image or the same outlook that I had. So because I was so positive and upbeat about it, and you know, I've never not embraced where I came from. I love that I came from the background that I did. It makes for a wonderful you know, I guess it paints a wonderful background of the history of Utah. I love Utah, and I reside here, you know, so I feel like I'm true blue and from here, and that I have a greater stake here than anyone else.
That's a good, healthy attitude, that's for sure. And which is really quite the opposite of my own experience. As a child, we were told that we were never to tell anybody anything. It's almost like we were ashamed. And in fact, after I did leave and I was free from it, I still had that shame and was afraid to talk about it with anybody, except for when I got married. And I told him 2 weeks before we got married, and I was embarrassed and ashamed to tell him. And even then, I had to tell him to promise to keep it a secret. But you know, when I found out that most of the people on the outside of polygamy groups know more about the polygamy groups than the people inside the groups do, I thought, oh, I've been made a fool of all these years.
And I know that's the case. A lot of my brothers and went through that. You know, being older and being indoctrinated, indoctrinated into the way of life in polygamy, definitely. And I remember hearing stories about my mom, you know, saying things to that would speak to that same fact, that they weren't allowed to talk about it. You weren't allowed to talk about your father, and there was things that they did so that neighbors or people around couldn't confuse you, you know, about who your dad was, or put two and two together that, wait a minute, there's only one dad and there's too many mothers. You know, there was a lot of things that they did to remain secretive about their lifestyle.
Yeah, they did. It's very secretive, and it's not a very good way to live where your life has to be kept a secret.
No, not at all.
It isn't healthy for the children either. How about your present relationships? Do you discuss polygamy with them, and how do they view your polygamous background and your polygamy family? I mean, you've got an older brother that's still involved in the group, although he doesn't live polygamy, does he?
No, he just has one wife currently, but he does believe that polygamy is the correct and right way to live, and you know, he believes that he definitely stands behind it. So, but at this time, and I'm not sure if he'll ever take another wife or not, but at this time, he just has one. So
that's good.
Yeah.
And your other friendships know about your past, and there's just it doesn't affect or influence
Oh,
any of
definitely.
it?
No, I mean, there was like I said, there was always been a warm welcome with all of my friends and my current relationships with where I came from in my past. And
What about your job? Does that have anything there with that?
no, every once in a while, someone new at work finds out, or they don't really believe me, or I'll be saying something about it, and they kind of laugh and walk off, and then the next day I hear them asking a coworker, "Was he really serious?" or I'll mention something about my mom's book, and they don't believe me, and I'm like, "Well, go to this website and you can see it." Yeah, yeah. I'm like, "You can see your book here, or it's in the bookstore downtown," or I'm like, "Yeah, if you have any questions about my authenticity, here you go.
Yeah.
I know I'm telling the truth. Here, check it out." So
we want to talk about a rather difficult part of the exit as far as your brothers are concerned. There was some sexual molestation done by your father with your older brothers, but not with you. Mary explained that to us last week during the program. And from your viewpoint, can you discuss how you have felt when you learned about this? How did you react to it? Did you understand it? As your brothers were recovering from this, did they want to stay away from male companionship or friendships because of it? How did it affect you?
Just at a young age, it's probably a really hard thing to understand for any kid. Life and death, and that's hard enough. When you see pets die or things like that, and then to even understand this, it's beyond trying to explain to a child, at least at the age I was, about what was going on. And so I remember attending counseling and things like that to try to get a grasp and an understand on it, and that was about it. It was my brothers.
How did you see your brothers as they tried to recover from it?
Well, I think between the brothers, we never really talked much about it. Obviously this is something that when it happens, it carries a lot of shame. It's almost like you feel like it's your fault, or like it was something you did.
Generally, that's what happens.
And so the shame, no matter how much they tell you it's not your fault or not to feel shame, you're going to feel that way. And so between siblings, we never really talked about the abuse much between each other, and until we were at a much, much, much older age. And so, but at a young age where you can't really understand and that's all you feel, I mean, you kind of kept tight-lipped about it.
Are your brothers recovered now? Do they seem to be pretty...
Oh, definitely. I feel like all my brothers are very well-adjusted, happy adults that are leading wonderful lives, and the children that they have will grow up in a loving home and grow up to be wonderful. They'll grow up to be wonderful adults also. So,
So healing comes through the Lord, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Why do you believe that the tendency for sexual abuse is higher in polygamy groups?
I feel that there's such a hard time differentiating between appropriate sexual contact between you and your wife, and then transferring to you and your children, because when a very elderly man marries a young woman that's 14, 15, and 16, how are you to differentiate between an appropriate sexual relationship with such a young woman and then also your children? I know that my father, from his first marriage, had children older than my mother, whom he married later. And so this is the same thing. He had children that were older than women that he was having sexual relationships with and marrying. And so there's a lot of muddied water there. It's hard to see and have a clear-cut line between what is appropriate and what is not when you're doing that.
What about a child, like your mother was very young, and a lot of the polygamous marriages now are child brides, and they don't know anything about, excuse me, the birds and the bees, so to speak, and yet they're thrust into this situation, and then they still don't know anything more than what their husband happens to tell them, which may be very little, and then they have children who start to grow up. How are they going to teach something to their kids that they don't know really very much about?
And I feel like that's something that's, I can't really speak to it because, I was a male, and so we really didn't have, much to learn about. But I know that just from speaking with my mother, that growing up at that age and going through that, it was very hard for her to learn about what was going on with her body and all that. But, I mean, imagine being a female growing up and not really knowing much about anything as far as appropriate sexual activity or even sexual activity altogether, and then being married off at a young age, and really you just know that, yeah, you're supposed to have sex with this guy because this is your husband, this is what you're supposed to do, this is the right thing to do. And so there's I'm sure that a majority of the women at that young age, I mean, they must be terrified. I would imagine that would be the only thing that they could be feeling was
absolute terror.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, that would be a very scary situation to be in.
I think it's interesting when we compare the groups. There's so much that are similar in the groups, and then there's a lot that are different and unique to each group. When I was being raised, my mother would teach me, when I became an adolescent and began to develop, she would tell me that the worst thing you can do, I think the 2 unforgivable sins was murder and sexual immorality. And she told me that if I was ever taken by a man, and even if a knife was held to my throat, that I was to give in and be raped or die. She said, die. She said, don't be raped, die. You cannot lose that virginity.
Wow.
And so that was my choice, death or my purity, so to speak. And yet, what I saw around me, all these men having all these wives,
Yeah.
and the woman had to stay pure, but the man could just go out and have his stuff, and it didn't compute. It never did. It doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense.
Well, definitely not. And the more ironic thing is that there was, you know, in any marriage, there could be infidelity, but having, you know, a man in a monogamous relationship where there's infidelity, you know, but to have a polygamous marriage where he has multiple wives and still finds a way to commit adultery, you know, and cheat, you know, that's a whole nother thing. So, and I know that happened a lot in some situations with people that were closer to me. So
yeah, it happens. And one of the excuses that I've heard people that want to talk about why they should live polygamy, why it's okay, although it's not okay, is that, well, it's better if you know, if your husband's going to step out on other women, it's better for you to know where he's at, like with the second wife, than it is for him to go out in the streets and get a mistress, you know. And that's like, well, do 2 wrongs make a right? It's a very poor rationalization, in my opinion.
Oh, that seems like a horrible justification.
It does, doesn't it? Okay. Right now, what advice or suggestions would you give to people or to society in general about dealing with the difficult issues of sexual abuse that are rampant in the polygamy groups, and the lack of fathering and the fear of being found out? Hopefully people will be watching this program either now or on streaming video who are in polygamy groups, and maybe young folks that need to have an encouraging word. How would you suggest that they work with these kinds of issues?
Well, you know, when you're a member of a more traditional polygamous group, you're taught that this outside world despises you and they hate you, and so as a member of a regular society or a community, when you see these polygamists, you know, I just feel like it's almost like you want to just do everything you can to let them know that you love them, because there's not much that they're shown that the outside world loves them and cares about them and has an outreach to them. And so once you, I guess, debunk that myth that everyone else out there hates them, you know, they're going to start questioning a lot of other things.
And also that we're not evil and of the devil.
Oh, definitely not.
They don't have a corner on morality, the way they talk about it.
Every once in a while I'd talk to my stepbrothers and sisters and on the phone after we left. I mean, very limited contact. But the first thing they would ask me is, well, how long is your hair? And they thought that since I left that I would just grow my hair really, really long and that I was wicked.
Really radical.
Oh, yeah, And so they would always ask me, well, that was the first thing, you know, even when I spoke to, you know, the other mothers in the group, they would always ask me, so how long is your hair? How long is your hair? And I'd say, it's really, really short. Okay, good. Okay, good. So I thought that was,
off the deep end.
Yeah, I thought that was really funny that they just associated this long hair with being wicked and evil, and they assumed that I had to have had long hair.
The assumptions of that. I'd like to remind each of you that our telephone number to call in is 801-973-TV20. We realize that tonight is a celebration. A lot of people are out celebrating the beginning of the weekend, and we don't have any phone callers yet. We do have plenty of things to talk about with Ben, so if we don't get a call in, that's fine too. You'll still be able to see the program on the streaming video. But if you're there watching the program and you have a comment or a question, feel free to give us a call, and we'd be happy to answer any concerns that you have. I'd like to talk about with Ben right now something that is very dear to my own heart, and it is the Lost Boys. Ben, I'm going to ask you to talk for people who do not know who the Lost Boys are or what that is about, or maybe update for people who know a little bit about it. Would you explain who the Lost Boys are? And then there's a couple of questions I want to ask you about them, and the first one is, why did it happen?
I guess you would say that you know, I could have been easily a lost boy. Young men growing up in a polygamy, if for whatever reason, whether it's rebellion or they have a falling out with a community, they're excommunicated and kicked out into the world that they've been taught their whole lives that this world hates them. And so they've been forced into a community, into an environment that's very, very uncomfortable and very scary to them. Mm-hmm. You know, their whole lives, their support system, their mother, their father, and their brothers and sisters, all of a sudden are completely gone. They really feel like that no one loves them, and they're pushed out into the world and with nothing but the shirt on their back.
Mm-hmm. And they were pushed out because the older men in the polygamy group saw them as competition for the younger girls that they wanted to take as wives?
Well, you know, a lot of times there may or may not be, you know, confrontation between, you know, kids wanting to grow up and marry certain, you know, other people and giving them away. But, you know, I'm not sure for one reason or another why they were kicked out, but I know in my experience, or from what I understand, it's, you know, maybe that you know, they hadn't lived up to a holy enough standard. They started doing things that the group didn't approve of, and you know, men in a polygamous group are a dime a dozen, and so they're expendable, and you can crumple them up and throw them and toss them away. And that's what these Lost Boys are.
The Lost Boys. And there were, what, 1,200 to 2,000 boys that were removed from the Colorado City group in about 2004 and just dropped off under the underpasses, on the street corners, taken into St. George and just let loose, and they didn't have any money, they had no skills, they had no clothing. They had nothing, absolutely nothing.
No, and it's not like the groups are training these men and making them able-bodied and educated,
right. They couldn't fend for themselves.
Yeah, you're dropped off in the middle of a world that you have no idea what's out there,
mm-hmm.
and not prepared.
And then when they did get a job, I understood that so many of them had not had any training in economy. They'd get their paycheck and go and blow it all in the same day, and then they wouldn't have any money until the next paycheck because they.
Oh yeah, I mean,
understanding
understanding and having the knowledge to deal with your finances, you know, these in a lot of aspects with money and other grown-up issues. I mean, these guys are a lot like children,
mm-hmm.
because it's not like they've been prepared and taught and brought up in any of these items, you know, any of these areas of their
mm-hmm.
life. And now to have to deal with it and be responsible and have that understanding and that comprehension, they don't really have much of that.
Yeah, that's true. We do have a call in. Right now we're going to take a call from Chino in Taylorsville. Hello, Chino.
Hi. I'm a 38-year-old man, and I was just interested in getting a couple of 19, 20-year-old brides. I was just wondering where I go to sign up to become a polygamist.
We are against polygamy, so we won't be able to answer your question. Thank you. Why did I say thank you? That wasn't a thank you call. Okay, so let's have your personal opinion of this event. Your just personal feeling, like you said, you could have been a lost boy.
Oh, definitely.
And so definitely there would be a sensitive part in you about what happened. And have you heard how these boys are coping, or even if they are coping?
You know, a lot of them, yeah, I don't think that the integration is a very smooth one. You know, a lot of them turn to alcohol and drugs, and you know, they've been pretty much taught that that they're gonna go to hell. They didn't live good enough. They've been kicked out of this community, and there's nowhere to turn for these boys.
So they're going to go to hell anyway.
Yeah, so let's get there as fast as we can, because that's where I'm going no matter what. So they turn to drugs and alcohol, and you know, some of them live a wild life, and it's very hard. It was very hard integration. And the other ones, I mean, you know, it takes a while, and I think a lot of them, they've kind of band together. So you know, it's not uncommon for them to find you know, each other, and maybe have that be the beginning of a new support system for them.
That's true. In fact, they would be the only ones that they would trust, would be themselves.
Oh, definitely.
Because they're in a world they've been taught is against them. How can we, or can we, as a society, keep this from happening again? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Because it's a closed polygamy group. What can we do about it?
You know, I would, you know, I could you, I guess, rephrase your question. You're asking, how do we keep what from happening?
Can we, or how can we keep this incident of the lost boys, of the polygamy groups, just dropping them off into society?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of, I guess there's groups and efforts and communities there for a lot of the women that are leaving polygamy, but you don't really hear a whole lot about people reaching out to the boys and to the boys that are kicked out and ostracized from those polygamous groups. And so just being there, I guess, to let them know that they understand that they're loved, and that this world's not wicked, and, you know, and as horrible as it was made out to be, they're, you know, as they were made to understand it. And
yeah. Excuse me, if you're going to continue.
Oh, no, I'm done.
I would like to say at this point that there are people out there who will help you. If you want to go to a web page, it's shieldandrefuge.org. That's shieldandrefuge.org. And that will give you information, whether you're male or female, whether you're fleeing from a polygamous marriage or a lost boy who needs help. You go to the contact page and email or telephone, contact the people on that page, and it will be held in strict confidence. And we do want to help anybody and everybody who is trying to get out of a situation that is a result of polygamy. And so there is help out there for any of the lost boys. We are taking telephone calls. If you want to give us a call at 973-8820, we have a call from Jean in Layton. We'll take the call. Hello, Jean.
Hi, Doris.
Welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate your show. I've only caught it a couple of times, but I do have a question. My husband was raised LDS, and we've discussed some of these things, and thank goodness for people like you and Sean McCraney. He's seeing some truth now.
Thank you.
And but my question, and that we've kind of discussed, is we see some similarities when you think about the FLDS and people like David Koresh and Jim Jones, where they separate their people from society and from the world. And there's other places, other groups too, I think, like in Missouri now, or I don't know. There's some strange religious groups out there. But do you see a similarity with that? And even with Brigham Young and bringing his followers here, and kind of, leave your family and, let's start away from the rest of the world.
Do you want to take that, Ben? Do you see a similarity with some of these David Koresh cults and with the polygamy groups?
Well, I know between any polygamy group, you're going to have differences and of how they work and operate. To me, I see every once in a while I'll run into someone, even coworkers, and they say, "Yeah, my dad has 3 wives," and I never would have guessed at all. They look and dress and just like anyone else, and so there's huge differences. To me, growing up as a young man, I always thought people would ask me, well, what religion are you, or what were you? And when I was a kid, I didn't say I was polygamist. I said I was LDS. And so I had a hard time differentiating between what was and wasn't. I didn't understand.
Yeah. And you know, there are always the dangers of these closed communities. We do understand that. We just hope that we can keep a good tap on them so that if anything did start to happen like David Koresh or Jim Jones, that hopefully the authorities would be able to pick up on that pretty quickly. Thank you, Jean, for your call.
Oh, thank you very much. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. We have Marie in West Valley. Hello, Marie.
Hi. My question is, how can you help the children of the polygamist cult that it won't take them away from their beliefs of the religion, of believing in God and the teachings of the rest of the, like the LDS Church, the Catholics and that, about God and Jesus and that, instead of just what they are taught in the polygamy cult about what they can do and what they can't, and everybody else is demons?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that I've run into, and it actually was my own experience, was once I got out of the polygamy group, I ran away from God as well. And I'm running across that still with a lot of people. They are only experiencing the negatives of what this group said God required, and it really isn't even the truth, and yet they don't want to have anything to do with God because they're away, they have their freedom. And so it is a very difficult question. We do want them to believe in God, but we don't want to put them or even introduce them to some other religious system. That wouldn't be healthy either. But a good, fresh, clean relationship with Jesus Christ is actually the best thing to do, and of course He's our best friend.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Marie. We have line 2, Antoinette in Sandy. Hello, Antoinette.
Yeah, this is Antoinette.
Antoinette?
Yeah, how are you doing?
We are doing fine, thank you.
Yes, I have a question. My question is, I am Christian, and the LDS missionary came to my house, and I have to listen to Joseph Smith.
Do you need to turn down your television?
Okay.
You need to turn down your television.
Okay, wait. Okay, I did.
Okay.
Okay, and they told me that Joseph Smith is the way, and I have to believe to Joseph Smith, and I told them only Jesus I can believe on him.
That's a good answer.
And that I have to meet them maybe in 1 week. What I have to tell them?
Well, we're not supposed to believe in any man. We're to believe only in Jesus, like you said. He is the Savior. There's no religious group that is, and there is no particular man other than Jesus Christ who can help us or even get us into heaven. So you did give a good answer, Antoinette.
Amen.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for calling.
Okay.
Bye. Well, Ben, we're getting closer to the end of the program tonight, but there is a question I really want to ask you. There have been some events that have been set up locally by the young people, young folks, teenagers and young folks from the polygamy groups, and they'll gather together and they'll rally for polygamy. And they'll basically say, we're happy, we want to maintain our home life the way it is, we've had good parents and a good family life, why don't you just leave us alone and live and let live? Mm-hmm. My first question is, what is your opinion of this? And my second question is, what would you say to these young people about the polygamy life versus freedom?
You know, this may be, these kids and these children may be very happy in the homes that they're in. They might be well adjusted, there may not be any abuse, but as I reflect on my life post-polygamy, and this is pretty much all I've known, is I've always looked back and I get to see all the choices that I got to make and all the choices I got to enjoy that I wouldn't have in being raised and kept in polygamy. Mm-hmm. The biggest one to me that stood out the other day was I got to choose who I got to marry, and I got to write my own love story. I got to pick the woman.
Awesome.
I got to fall in love with her. I got to have a great time with her. And that was something that's something that's priceless. You know, in polygamy, I felt like even if I was holy enough to be given a wife, or many wives, I would have been strapped down with the obligation of family and children. You know, birth control or anything like that is completely forbidden in polygamous groups, or the ones that that I can speak of. And so, you know, my wife and I being able to fall in love, be married, and choose when we have children and raise a family is a huge choice, and one that that you could never take for granted.
It is, and I thank you for that answer. That's very good. We are very close to just a couple more minutes. We have a question here they wanted to answer off the air. It's, do fundamentalists and polygamists still practice blood atonement? The fundamentalists and polygamists are the same people. The fundamentalist LDS are the people who practice the fundamental teachings of the Joseph Smith doctrine of polygamy. Do they still practice blood atonement? They did in the LeBaron group. Right now, I don't think there's any that do, although there's many that do take that and threaten people with it, but I don't know that they actually practice it. We need to close our show tonight. It is getting close. I would like to introduce our next guest for next week. He's a man who was interviewed on the DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy. He was raised in the Kingston group like I was. He was true blue. He was true blue to the core. If anybody was not going to leave a polygamy group, I would have thought it would have been him. But God had other plans, and he did indeed leave. He didn't leave without challenges, but he successfully left. And now he is a man who was once loyal to a man, but is now a man who is loyal to the one and only true God. So join us next week as Paul Owen joins us for interviewing in the next program. Please email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. There's one call we haven't been able to take, Kathleen from Salt Lake. Please email us and ask us your question, or call back next week, because we would love to hear from you. For anybody out there, girls or women, who have been told that who you marry or if you marry has a bearing on your eternity, don't believe it. It isn't true. Look it up, search it out, read the Bible, find the chapter and the verse for such a comment, and you won't find it at all, because Jesus is the Savior, not anyone whom you could marry. And I would like you to know that the flesh of man will not save you, only the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, and you're accepting of that. Thank you for sharing your evening with us, and I would like to remind you that God has spoken. Each man is to have his own wife, and each wife is to have her own husband. That's singular, no sharing allowed. So, we see you next week. Thank you, God bless, and good night.